Hey everybody, wanted to make a quick video for you. Bear with me, I'm no Instagram genius, so I'll probably stumble through this a little bit. Got the Citizens 4-point form pulled up here, and we're going to talk about cloth wiring or knob and tube wiring. Of course, form says indicate the presence of any of the following. You've got your cloth wiring box and your active knob and tube. I'm not going to go into in-depth discussions about some of this stuff. You can Google knob and tube and read about it. First generation wiring, it's what they put in homes. So I brought some samples to show to the camera, and the samples will kind of explain what you're dealing with when we talk about cloth wiring. And I'll get into why I'm having a discussion, because I had an incident a couple weeks ago where an electrician wanted to debate me on cloth wiring versus rubber wiring. So this is your first generation. It's a knob and tube wire, and what makes it a cloth covered wire is if you look closely you can see the frayed end here. Most of these wires, I believe, had a rubberized compound that the cloth jacket wrapped around, so whether it was rubber, and I believe some were asbestos or had asbestos in them. Asbestos is a wonderful insulator. The rubber or asbestos would insulate the wire, and the woven jacket would cover everything up, and that's what you got for first generation. Now, you would probably never find this in a house in Melbourne or in the county. If you do, it's going to be abandoned more than likely, but on a rare occasion we do, or somebody else I know runs into some of this stuff and it's still being used. And chances are, if it's still being used, I doubt anybody's going to insure you. They're going to want you to change that wire over to modern wire. So then we evolve a little bit. We got a couple other sets of wires here. This is kind of a predecessor to what we would call the non-metallic or the current wiring we see. They've kind of compacted our neutral and our hot wire together, but again, you've got this woven jacket, and this, whatever's in this stuff, I don't know if it's rubber or whatever, but it's pretty brittle. I've taken another sample apart and it just kind of crumbled on me to get the live wire exposed. So I think this came out of an old house in Cocoa, in a crawl space. It had been abandoned, but that was the original wire they put in the house. So that was one sample, and then another one that I have actually found some that they're still using is what's called old armored cable, or they call this stuff BX. The old Citizens forms actually had a spot that you can mark BX, and it was, in my opinion, incorrectly labeled, because if you look inside the BX, you're back to cloth wire. So they do make a modern armored cable. They sell it. You see it in a lot of commercial applications, but for the older homes that you would find around here, and I have found this in attics of some of these old houses built in the 20s and 30s, and they're still using it. You find it where it's running from it's kind of sneaky. They'll replace all the outlets, but you'll find it where it's running from like the light switch to the overhead light fixture. If you go up in the attic, you'll see it running through the attic everywhere. So if you ever do see this old armored cable in an older house and it's still being used, it is a cloth covered wire, as you can see plainly right there. So again, those are kind of the standard concept or ideas of showing you what cloth wire would be. And then we evolve a little bit. Now, we get into the 50s and 60s, and there's a lot of 50s and 60s houses here when they really started building houses. And then we get this guy. This is a sample of what you typically see in the older houses here. This is an NM wire, or non-metallic. You would call it Romex now for kind of like a branding name. But if you look at the actual wire, the wire has a plastic jacket on it. It's not cloth. It's not got any rubber compounds. It's not woven. Now the outer protective case does have a woven material. With that said, the biggest gripe I have is you'll run into other home inspectors and they'll document this stuff as cloth wiring. This, of course, is my opinion. This isn't cloth wiring. It says NM or non-metallic on the jacket when you read it. This actually is a grounded wire. And again, that's a different talk altogether. It does have a very skinny ground wire, but this is a 3-wire grounded electrical wiring. So it has It doesn't have the same temperature rating. This has actually a lower temperature rating than the new wire, which, again, different discussion, but I would not consider this a cloth wire just because the outer jacket has a woven material. A huge night and day difference there. Cloth wire, more of a modern wire. So with that said, the discussion that was going on is the service wire. They'll, a lot of times they'll replace these panels, and the municipalities they won't force you to bring everything up to speed. It's a like-for-like swap. It's considered a repair. So they'll change the panel out. You got an old Federal Pacific, and you put a brand new panel in, and then they leave this old ratty service wire. So the service wire is what comes from the electrical. It comes from the meter base into the panel that you'd have in your laundry room. And up through the 60s, they were still putting in service wire that was rubber, that had a rubber jacket on it. And this is a sample piece of a service wire. And again, as you can see, it's got a frayed jacket. It's got the strands on the wire itself. You'll see some different variances of it. Some of them will actually have a plastic wrap around them, so you technically couldn't consider them cloth. But the real concern we've seen with this service wire is the rubber gets brittle as it dry rots, and we all know rubber dry rots, whether it's car tires or anything else. When it gets to a certain point, it starts to fall apart. And what we find is you'll get these service wires coming in these old panels that have been there for a long time. They've got these nice sharp bends in them. Well, the rubber will break, it'll crack. I've actually had some, and I wish I could find pictures, but I didn't think about putting them in a folder at the time, but there'll be chunks of this stuff missing, and you'll have the exposed live electrical copper there. So you'll pull the panel off this old main outside, and there'll be a service wire that's crumbling or falling apart. And you can see the rubber here is getting brittle. And a lot of that comes from age, dry rotting, and then temperature of these things. So again, the temperature rating of this old service wire is lower than the new stuff that you would get. So that comes into play too. You're trying to take an older house, put a new panel in it, put all these modern things in it, and sometimes when you try to replace these panels and update the service, you have to replace the service wire too. So the discussion at hand was the wire was exactly like this one, and the guy goes, "Oh no, it's rubber, it's not cloth. It's the same exact makeup as this stuff. It's got the same woven jacket on it, and obviously, it's an old wire. It's going to dry rot. I've seen plenty of examples of this stuff deteriorating inside the panels. And it's bad enough if you have this stuff come apart and it makes contact in like the panel where it has an overprotection or a circuit breaker on it. But if this stuff ever deteriorated inside like your service coming down into the panel, there's no overcurrent protection there. So if it does deteriorate, something happens and it makes contact with the metal pole, it could be an exciting situation on the outside of your home when it comes in there. So figured I'd share that with you. Leave some comments, discussions, disagreements, whatever you got, and hopefully somebody learned something from it. But thought it was an interesting thing to share in regards to understanding one of the aspects of the Citizens 4-point form and labeling of cloth wire.